Welcome back to Chaos and Caffeine, the podcast where we embrace the beautiful messiness of parenting with ADHD. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome a true powerhouse in the world of educational neuroscience, Dr. Rebecca Troy. With over 22 years of experience in education, Dr. Troy is not only a nationally board-certified teacher in early and middle literacy, but also holds a doctorate in education. She's the founder of the groundbreaking program Retrain the Dyslexic Brain, which has transformed the lives of thousands of children by helping them overcome reading challenges through innovative neuroscience-based techniques. As a mother of two, including a thriving dyslexic child, Dr. Troy understands firsthand the struggles and triumphs that come with parenting neurodivergent children. Her approach is not just about improving reading skills, it's about building confidence, fostering emotional resilience, and empowering parents to become active participants in their child's learning journey. In this episode, Dr. Troy shares her insights on how ADHD and dyslexia often intersect, the importance of recognizing and nurturing the unique strengths of neurodiverse children, and practical strategies that parents can implement at home to support their children's development. So, grab your favorite cup, take a deep breath, and join us as we dive into an enlightening conversation with Dr. Rebecca Troy. Trust us, this is one episode you won't want to miss. Dr. Troy, welcome to Chaos and Caffeine.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So I am a sucker for a good origin story. So I would love for you to tell me what led you to specialize in retraining our dyslexic brains.
Yeah. So maybe you know this, but dyslexia is highly heritable. So my family, nearly all of them have it. My little brother, my parents, other people in my extended family. For whatever reason, it skipped me. But I ended up a classroom teacher. And through my journey of teaching kids English in middle and high school, I had many students who came to my classroom without the ability to read. And it was not a part of my teacher training at all. Like, it was expected that once kids got to that level, they should already know how to read. We don't need to teach you how to teach them to read because that's something that they should already know. And, when it became clear that increasingly year after year, I had more and more students that didn't know how to do that, and I had no training whatsoever how to help them, I decided to go back and get master's degree, PhD in how to actually do this. And it just so happened that I ended up under the direction of one of the first neuroscience and reading disability researchers who did a lot of brain mapping and, had conversation about all of those things. So I think, it was serendipitous that I ended up with her, but just have really continued down that journey. And now, as a parent myself, I knew that there was a high likelihood that my own children would have dyslexia. And sure enough, I've got two children, one of the two of them does. And it's been truly incredible to be on this side of it, to say, I know what to do, I know how to help her. So that really was the genesis of like, okay, there's got to be other people who need exactly the type of support that I was able to provide for her. So how can we make that happen?
I love that so much. I believe that it skipped you because we needed you to be on the other side to bring us all along.
Thank you.
So I know that you said that there was a family connection and now your own children. I guess you've already kind of described it, but it must feel amazing to be in that role to where you can help not only other people, but your own children now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, like, we had a celebration last night, my husband and I, after the kids went to bed, where parent teacher conferences were yesterday. And so I knew what to do and how to support her. But, when she was 3 and 4 years old, I didn't get really intense about it. Like, we would just play little brain games and we would do things to try to support her. But it was clear that she did have a more severe case. And so we got really serious about doing some work with her late kindergarten and then really hit it hard first grade. But she's excelling. She's above her school average, the national average. I think they said last night that she was at the 72nd percentile in her class. And so
Wow.
just really celebrating the different kind of school experience that she will have
Yeah.
because we did the work.
That's so amazing to hear.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if it resonates with all parents, but parent teacher conferences make me nervous for
Yeah.
absolutely no reason, you know?
Can appreciate that.
Like a readout of my successes or failures as a parent, even though I know
Yes,
that's not really what they are.
I totally appreciate that. But it is hard, especially if your child is not doing well, to go to those.
Yeah. Yeah. My son told me we had ours 2 weeks ago and he was in the back seat and he was really quiet and he was like, Mom, I haven't done anything bad, but it still makes me really nervous. And I was like, well, I think that's okay. They made mom nervous. I was a quote unquote book nerd, so I think that's pretty normal.
Yeah, I think so too.
So we know that many children and adults with dyslexia also have ADHD. Can you break down the connection between them and how they go hand in hand?
Yeah, absolutely. So it can be really common that there are other things that are happening alongside of dyslexia. So dyslexia can be all by itself. And, in that case, there are, an additional 20% that have ADHD on top of that. But what's really interesting is that the opposite statistic is actually more true. So if you have ADHD, you are 40% more likely to also have dyslexia.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, but it's difficult sometimes if you have ADHD or dyslexia to get the brain to function the way that you want it to be able to perform whatever the task is. So, with ADHD, a lot of that is the neurochemicals that are not necessarily present to allow you to focus on the things that you would want in that moment. And the same thing is true for dyslexia in that, there are neurobiological areas of the brain that are just not functioning in the way that we would expect for a typical reader. And so that causes challenges in the moment.
Have you noticed any misconceptions about dyslexia or ADHD in particular if they're coexisting?
Yeah, actually, I'm thinking of a client in particular who had a middle school age son, and the parent teacher conferences happened, and like, I think you really need to medicate your son. He is all over the classroom. He cannot sit still. He's up getting a drink of water all the time. We really, really just think that you need to go see a physician about this and potentially get him some medication for ADHD because he's just not able to sit still and focus.
Yeah.
And what was interesting is that the root cause of that was actually a significant struggle with reading.
Mhm.
And so the reason that he didn't want to sit down was because it was super hard for him. And so he knew that they were going to be reading around the classroom and it was going to be his turn pretty soon to have to do that. So if I'm moving around and I'm at the water fountain, like maybe I'm not going to get called on and I don't have to be embarrassed in front of my peers. And so when he was successful, even midway through the program, those reports of him moving around stopped entirely. And mom was like, see, I knew I should have trusted my instincts that this wasn't really ADHD. This was
Yeah.
really, something else. So yeah, it can happen that way where sometimes, it can look like it's hyperactivity or, just an inattentive behavior, but it's really this significant struggle that's underlying it.
So I will tell you my story. I thought that my child might have dyslexia because he hated reading so much.
Yes.
It took us 3 years, and on sheer accident, he started OT for handwriting. And while
Yeah.
he was in occupational therapy, his occupational therapist noticed that his eyes were jumping while he was reading. And so for years, I had been telling the school, I think he has dyslexia. And they're like, no, he doesn't. But it turns out it was another cause. And I think what you said, we need to get down to the root of whatever the issues are. Instead of slapping a label on it, just off of symptoms, we need to do our due diligence and find out what's happening.
Exactly. And, oftentimes it is more than one thing. And so, yes, it can be dyslexia, but if the words are jumping around on the page, having a conversation with a pediatric ophthalmologist and like looking at the vision more closely is super important. So to your
Yeah.
point, absolutely, just keep digging until you kind of get to the heart of it.
Yeah. Interesting. I have so many stories throughout my parenting journey where specialists, doctors, pediatricians, all types of people are like, "Let's just be patient." And I'm like, "No, let's do this right now." Since both conditions impact learning in different ways, how does intervention differ one from the other or when they both exist?
Yeah, you mean like ADHD and dyslexia or
Yeah.
yeah. So I think when you are doing any kind of therapy, just to your point that you just made, I think it's really important that you're targeting the thing that you want to see grow. So in the case of dyslexia, if the visual and auditory systems of the brain aren't really working together, targeting that and doing that consistently and with repetition can really make a positive difference in a short window of time. Um, and so sometimes what happens is, we're kind of tangentially working on those issues and like seems like we're maybe making some headway, but unless you really kind of target that specifically, um, and measure the growth and the progress that you're having, it's hard to know whether or not you're doing the right thing. So
Yeah.
they can impact each other. It's definitely true that ADHD and dyslexia can co-occur. So maybe you can't sit for 10 to 15 minutes like, we need to do in our program specifically. So parents are having to break that up. Like, okay, we're going to do just 5 to 7 minutes and then we need a break and we got to maybe run around or we got to kind of reset this energy and then come back to it later. So definitely listening to your child and what they need, kind of trying to tailor to that is important.
Yeah. So you had a heads up, Doc, since this is definitely genetic and heredity, it may impact your child. But what about parents who are wondering, how would I know if my child is struggling and when do I seek help?
Yeah. So I think it's important to address some common misconceptions. Sometimes people will say, you can't possibly know if you have dyslexia until you're 8 or 9, which is
Mm.
simply not true.
Yeah.
Like you could absolutely diagnose that way, way earlier, even 3, 4 years old, you can start seeing the signs and symptoms of those things. And so um, it is okay and a very good idea to start screening for those things as early as possible. So to do a kindergarten screening, to do a first grade screening, and some schools and some states actually are doing that now through different legislation that they've passed to say we need to be screening everybody because the earlier we catch this, the earlier we can intervene and
Yeah.
therefore, like circumvent some of these really significant struggles that these kids are having unnecessarily. Um, but sometimes, there's not access to those things. And it can be true that, like, yep, we've got one testing center and it's 2 hours away and there's a wait list of 6 months plus, and it's probably going to cost $4,000 to $5,000 or more.
Yeah.
So those cases are true. And in that instance, I would highly recommend that you do a dyslexia screener. So it's not going to be an official diagnosis, but depending on the quality of the screener, like you can absolutely dig in over multiple tests because that diagnosis is going to come through the discrepancy between the child's IQ and this unexpected difficulty with language. So if I've got a really bright kid who's, you have a conversation with them and you're like, wow, this kid is amazing. And then you ask them to read on their own and it's like, well, that's not what I expected. Or, please spell these words and we're missing letters or we're adding letters or maybe even an entire syllable is missing. Or like I'm asking you to rhyme words and that's a super challenge.
Yeah.
They're unexpected and it doesn't match what we would anticipate the intelligence to be. That's where that diagnosis comes from. And so yes, you could do the full assessment battery, especially if you're curious about, is there also ADHD or do we also have challenges with this, that, or the other thing? That's where that information might be really valuable. But if you're just wondering, like, is it that they have dyslexia or they just don't like reading? Like in your case, a
Mm.
screener would be an amazing option.
And you're saying in the 3 to 4 range, you're saying early intervention is the best.
The
So that would
best.
just be curiosity, or like you said, if you're talking to them and you're like, can you reference these sight words or something like that, and they're just off balance there.
Right.
Hmm.
Right. And so, one of the reasons that it is best to do those early identification is because then you can respond, and the brain is super pliable. I mean, it's just like a little sponge at that age,
Yeah,
and they haven't had the opportunity to feel like I don't belong in this classroom, or I'm all of the emotional things that come along with struggling mightily. And
yeah,
there's nothing that more trying is going to do um, to overcome. And so, the earlier you can head that off, the better it is for the psychological well-being of the child.
for sure. And so once you get the printout or the review of those screeners, that's when people would come to you or someone who could help them rewire those systems, those neurotransmitters.
Yeah, so I think that's another great point is that you can get a diagnosis or you can do a screener, but it is just a piece of paper. And so you've got this information, but then, it's still necessary to then take the next steps and say, okay, so then what am I going to do with that? And so probably one of the most important things, and we've got two different options for people to use for a screener. Like, we've got a do it yourself, just click this button, you can within 20 minutes know whether or not that's what you're dealing with, and it'll automatically kick you out results. Or, like, we've got a full up workshop where we do those things with parents and all of those things. But then to take that next step to say, what are we going to do about this?
Yeah,
And I think making sure that whatever it is that you choose is linked to the root cause, which is the brain's inability to kind of manipulate, hear, and respond to sounds is critical.
so up until just now, in the very beginning, you said that it is an auditory and a sight
That's
disorder.
exactly right.
They're
Yeah.
both playing parts in there.
Mhm.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. So if we were to look at an image of a typical reader, neurologically typical, we would see activity in the back part of the brain that's called the occipital lobe, where vision is controlled. And we would also see activity over the ears in this parietal temporal lobe. And both of those areas would be lit up if we were reading something or spelling something or anything related to a language task. But if you look at the same neurological moment for a person with dyslexia, you would see almost no activity in that visual system and far, far less in the auditory systems.
Oh,
So that's why, sometimes a child might really, really work hard to decode the word cat, ant. And then 2 lines later, we see the same exact word and we have no idea what it is. And it's because of that neurological disconnect in the systems and the brain just really not knowing how to respond to that. The same thing is true, like if you're trying to spell and you're adding letters in or you're omitting letters that should have been there, maybe even an entire syllable, it's that brain's inability to connect the visual and auditory system together.
interesting. Man, I have learned so much, and we've only been on for 20 minutes. So,
It's fascinating.
it really is. And I've learned so much just in such a short time. So, outside of parents looking for maybe sight words or a delay in reading, is there any other symptoms that we should really be looking out for in this area?
Yeah. So I think once a child is able to start spelling, the physical writing is often a really, really clear indicator. So if I've got a word that has no J in it at all, and I've got this J that's right in the middle, and you're like, wow, where did you come up with that? It's a red flag, like we're clearly not associating the sounds in the word to what I'm actually putting down. So added letters, omitted letters, entire syllables that are omitted, those are huge red flag moments. The child's ability to rhyme. So I've got the word jump, and I am trying to come up with words that rhyme with jump. Those skills are super, super difficult. If I were to give you a word auditorily, like Germany, take away ma, what's left? The
Mm.
mental Olympics that's required to picture the word Germany, recognize that ma is the middle sound, take it out, put the front and the end back together, and then say what those sounds are is nearly impossible for a person with dyslexia. So those kinds of tasks are super, super powerful indicators to say, oh dear, like this is not what we would expect.
Mm.
Again, because this most of the time is an average or above average intelligence person who has this unexpected delay. So, sometimes if you're late to talk, or, if you have difficulty learning your alphabet or doing any of the developmental milestones that should be happening along the way, and we're noticing that there is a delay there, those are all red flag moments. And the more of them that you have, the more your interest should be piqued of like, okay, we need to find out some more here.
Got you. Looking for some new toys and tools that your ADHD kiddos will love? Play Therapy Supply has you covered with a great selection of toys, games, and fidgets that can be used by ADHD children, their parents, caregivers, and professionals alike. From fidget toys that help children calm down, de-stress, and focus, to social emotional learning resources to help kids understand their feelings and emotions, to games and activities designed to improve emotional regulation. Play Therapy Supply has it all. For thousands of items and fast and free shipping, visit playtherapysupply.com today. So, we know to look for the early signs and the intervention. We've found you, and now what happens next? I'm very curious to know.
Yeah. So when we work with clients, it is pretty intensive. So not in terms of the time interval every day, because they're, doing 10 to 15 minutes of work, but it is that consistency and the
Mm.
repetition over time. And so the way that the neuron is going to respond is like, okay, I remember this from yesterday, and I'm going to build on that and continue to grow. So that usually happens over a 4-month period. Sometimes we have clients that need to stay a little bit longer, maybe 5, 6 months, depending on how many other things that they have going on at the same time as dyslexia. But, like we just had a little guy who, not so little, he's 10, but he had dysgraphia, dyslexia, apraxia of speech, and autism. And in 4.5 months, he went from the 7th percentile to the 79th.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's just super powerful if you're in the place where you're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing we can do, because they did tell her that. He was in a school where they just said, sorry, there's really not much more we can do for Caleb. He's just not going to grow, and we're going to kind of just lower the expectations of what we think he's going to have for coursework and all those things. And Mama was not having it. And she's like, no, absolutely not. I think that he's a really bright boy. And sure enough, you
Thank
help the brain
goodness.
to learn those things, and it's incredible what can happen.
I love a mama bear advocate story.
No, she was not having it.
So, I have a couple of questions, but one that came to mind immediately when you said that it's really the repetition and relying on the memory. So,
Yeah,
ADHD kiddos usually have memory recall issues in the executive
sure.
function. How would that look like for our kiddos?
Yeah, so it often happens for clients that there's also a working memory deficit. And usually it happens around 5 items. So 3 things, 4 things they can remember, but the minute that we have to go beyond 5 things, six digits, seven words, doesn't matter what it is, that we start to see like we hit a wall and we just really can't go beyond that. So we actually work to help retrain how to hold and
Mm.
manipulate that many things. And so when we do that simultaneously with the dyslexia, it is incredible to see how much that supports all of learning.
Yeah. So you really have to be multifaceted because you're teaching more than just dyslexia skills. You're
Yeah,
teaching, I mean, that is an executive function skill that you're having to rely on just to teach what you wanted to teach them. Yeah.
for sure. but they absolutely go together. And so, something else that we do that's probably a little bit out of the box is that we talk about mindset, and we've got mindset coaches on our team because you can have the capacity to do, but if you don't believe that you can self-sabotage right out of, feeling successful. So, um, yeah, to your point, I think that it is multifaceted, but individualized in terms of what the kiddo needs.
Yeah. I love that so much. I'm a little woo woo in some areas, as my son would say, but I am constantly trying to tell him, you can do anything, you can get better at anything with a little practice. And he's like,
Yeah.
no, I can't, Mom. But I'm hoping that like my voice is implanted in there, so that one
Yeah.
day he'll remember that like it really is almost everything is a mindset.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, to learn that mistakes actually grow your brain, and you learn more from a mistake than you do from getting it right the first time, and being willing to take risks and having resilience and grit and all those things are just so, so powerful.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just as important to us as the skill building.
Yeah. I love that. So I need to jump back to the mama bear advocate for a second, and
Yeah.
I'm wondering if a lot of the cases that come to you are cases that the system has kind of dismissed and given up on. Do you find that often?
We do. In cases, there are very supportive schools that are doing everything that they can with every resource that they have available. But in some cases, their hands are tied too. They're dealing with limited staffing, and they'd love to be able to pull the kid one-on-one and work with them, however long that they would need to, but that's just not realistic in a lot of cases. And then there also are those cases where, whether it's kind of an antiquated methodology, or like this is just the way that I teach and everybody needs to do it the way that I do it.
Yeah.
There is still some of that, unfortunately. And so a lot of kids are forced to, you must take the notes and they have to be handwritten, and you have to do, this chapter of this reading, and the inflexibility that comes with actually meeting the learner where they're at happens way more often than you'd expect. And
Yeah.
so we find that a lot of the clients meet such resistance that they actually end up pulling their child out of school because it's just too much to really feel successful anymore. And the child starts to spiral in a mindset way, and it can be bullying and all of those things. So, yeah, unfortunately, there are many clients who fall into that category.
Yeah. So, I mean, from 7% to the 70th percentile is an amazing jump, but is that one of the biggest aha moments that you've had, or one of the most outstanding moments?
No, I mean that's typical. So the average kiddo is making 50 percentile points of growth in 4 months, which I think really does speak to the neurological aspect of what's possible when you have the brain functioning in the way that you would want.
Yeah.
So if you're still not using those visual and auditory systems, yeah, you can make some small progress, but to really make the leaps, you have to kind of get to that root cause and say, this is the thing that's causing us to not be successful with reading and writing.
Mhm.
We've got that under control now, and then look at what can happen as a result, because I sound like a broken record, but these are really smart kids.
Yeah, I often find that we're very fortunate this year to have a teacher who is so compassionate and understanding. But she basically was like, he's really smart. We just can't get him to get it on paper. And I'm like, okay. But it was the first
Yeah,
time, that we had someone say, he knows it. We're having trouble getting it down. And that was
yeah,
really powerful to hear.
for sure, for sure. And then, it is hard because you'll have that experience one year, and then the very next year you've got a different person with maybe different
Yes.
expectations. And so that is true that sometimes, the flexibility, or like, let you take this auditorily, or just tell me the answer and I'll mark it down in your score that you know this.
Yeah.
But, it's not necessarily universal that everybody has the same expectations. So that's where it can really feel like this roller coaster for kids sometimes.
Yeah. Dr. Shori, do you work with schools on 504 and IEP plans to get them
Yeah,
the
so
accommodations?
we do have we do have some schools that have reached out to say, look, we do not have a plan for supporting these students, and we just continue to find that more and more, especially with COVID and some of the explicit instruction that was missed, that we need a plan. And so, yes, we have worked with schools and helped them to put not only a plan for screening in place, but like, what do we do inside of the school? But you know, we have found a tremendous amount of success just giving those tools to Mama Bear.
Yeah. When my son was diagnosed, I had went to a lecture with one of the most world-renowned ADHD experts, and I remember him very clearly saying, your job now is to advocate for your son. And as a Southern mom, I took that very personally.
Yeah.
So I'm sure the 40% of our audience who is struggling with ADHD and dyslexia are dying to know where they can work with you and how they can get on this train.
Yeah, you got it. So I think the easiest way is to go to drrebeccatroy.com because it's got all of those resources right there. So access to the screener, that's the one that if you want to do it yourself and just kind of get results kicked back to you, you can do that. There's a button to look at all of the case studies. If you need to be inspired about what's possible, a lot of the stories that I mentioned are there. We interview mama bears all of the time. And so you can listen directly from her to say, this is what it looks like before, this is what it looks like now.
Yeah.
There's access to a 45-minute webinar that kind of talks about the 5 simple steps that you can walk through to actually retrain the brain. And then there's obviously a contact button so you can reach out. We do offer complimentary sessions for anybody who feels like, you know what, I'm not sure if this is right for me. And we really dig in. So it's about a 45 to 60-minute call where we really dig in and find out, like, is your child actually struggling with the things that we can help you with? And if so, great, let's see if this is a match. And if not, that's okay. Like, we'll help you find something else that might be a better fit, but you have that access there too.
I love that you can do the 20-minute screener by yourself because most parents are very timid and apprehensive. And I
Yeah.
don't know why, but that seems like
Yeah.
a really great gateway in for parents who are shy.
Yes. And, something else that should be up relatively in short order are the dyslexia strengths. So we haven't necessarily talked about that a lot, but in the same way that there are differences in how the brain processes language, there's actually strengths in lateral thinking and creativity and spatial thinking. And, so we've got a beautiful quiz that helps you to identify like where your child's gifts are and to try to think about ways that you could support them in doing that even more. So all
Yes.
good things.
Oh, that's amazing. I am all about finding our strengths. For us, it's been, of course, hyper focus because what ADHD combo kid doesn't have that. So we've tried to really hype those up, and I love that you're doing that. So I know I've already asked you a million questions, but
Okay.
if someone's listening and they are struggling and there's just something that they wish they could do today, what would you think that that would be, and what would you tell them?
So I would say look at your mama instincts, first of all, and see, what kind of data do you have just in your observations that would support you in one way or another. Because I can't tell you how many times I hear from a mama, I just wish that I would have trusted myself because I felt it. I knew that there was something that wasn't what I expected. And so you spend more time with your child than anybody else. You know what that means if their little eyebrow goes up one way. I mean, you know this
Yeah.
child intimately. So trust that. And if you feel like there is something that isn't sitting right, start collecting data. How often am I seeing them misspelling things? How often am I seeing them guess at words? Does this seem different from what I would expect, maybe even with other children? That sometimes happens where, like, I didn't recognize that this was different because this was my first child. Now that I have child 2 and 3 or whatever,
Yeah.
they didn't have this at all. And they're actually surpassing this child. So now I recognize this is not typical, but just trust your instincts. And when you have the data that's telling you like, I think I might need to gather more data, take that opportunity and just find out what you need to find out.
That was a very unexpected answer, and I love it so much. I do feel like sometimes, maybe in that same brand of shy, apprehensive, timid parents, they're like, I just need a specialist to tell me. And sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's you need to trust your own instinct and intuition. And I love that you said that.
Yeah, it's true. It's every one of those mamas has known, every one of them.
Dr. Troy, this was so good. Thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, dang, wasn't that a masterclass in hope, science, and no BS parenting? A huge thank you to Dr. Rebecca Troy for not only breaking down the neuroscience of dyslexia and ADHD like the badass brain wizard she is, but for reminding us that our kids aren't broken, they just need different tools, and we, as their parents, are the ones who get to hand them over. If you love what Dr. Troy had to say, and literally how could you not, be sure to check out her program, Retrain the Dyslexic Brain. It's changing lives one confident, empowered kid at a time. You know I'll drop the links in the show notes, so go click it while you're hiding in the bathroom for 5 minutes of alone time. And if today's episode gave you that little spark, the one that says, you've got this, even when it feels like you don't, then of course subscribe and leave a review, but more importantly, share it with your fellow Chaos coordinators. Every listen helps us reach more parents who are just out here trying not to F it all up. Until next time, keep your coffee hot, your expectations low, and your heart open wide. You're doing better than you think. Bye.